Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Tonight's show is one of those shows where I stop and reflect a little on where things stand, what still needs to be done, and generally how it can be done. So a lot of what I am saying will be sort of recapping a lot of points we've made in our first 100 shows, but with a little bit different twist. And I'm also going to mention a little later in the show 2 new initiatives that we haven't talked about before. First, let's talk about this idea of, we know that the Wordpath show is about Oklahoma Indian languages. They're all considered endangered. That is, in most tribes, only the elders still speak the languages. So measures have to be taken. If not, if something isn't done quickly, all of these languages will die out in a matter of just a few generations, some of them in the matter of just a few years. So there is this problem. Now, the first question I want to ask is, well, who can help? And I'd like to give some general advice for about 5 different categories of people who live in Oklahoma. There's something that each of us can do, I think. First of all, let me mention that I'm executive director of the Intertribal Wordpath Society, which is a nonprofit organization dedicating to helping to preserve Oklahoma Indian languages. And I thought I would state the IWS goal because that will help to orient us a little bit. Our goal as an organization is to promote the teaching, awareness, status, and use of Oklahoma Indian languages. So we're trying to lead Oklahomans to do what's right for Indian languages. And as I said, almost everyone in the state has something that they can do if they care to get involved, if they care enough and take the time and effort to help out in this effort of preserving Oklahoma Indian languages. Number 1, suppose you are an Indian person in an Indian program. Maybe you're taking adult classes, or maybe you're helping with a preschool program, or you may work in your tribe's language department. There's several things I'd like to just mention about how I would suggest that you think about the whole set of language issues that we're faced with. Number 1, make sure that in your program, I firmly believe that programs should grow out of the tribe. They should be sort of grassroots. They should be led by the elders and the younger tribe members that are wanting to help the elders pass on their language. But language teaching is a technical task. I mean, not just anyone can do it. You don't come out of your mother's womb knowing how to even speak your language, let alone teach it. There are special language teaching skills that can be learned. So I would suggest that everyone make sure that you have consulted linguists or some kind of language teaching specialist. Don't just go by everyone's sort of common sense about how language should be taught. We've done several shows on specifically things to do and not to do in your language classes, but make sure that you consult someone who has some real expertise in this area. And make sure that they are language teaching specialists, not just teaching specialists, because there is a difference in teaching language versus teaching other things. And a second major point I would make, if you are in a language program, make sure that whatever efforts you're involved in, there may be many different little fingers in your program, different parts of the whole that you're working on. But make sure, above all, that at least some of your work is pushing towards connecting the elders with the very young. Why? Because as everyone that views this program, I think, knows by now, in many in every tribe, the majority, at least, of fluent speakers are elderly people. And so they have the most to offer as teachers, and at the same time, the young people are most able to learn. Children learn language so quickly and so effortlessly that the key thing to do is connect the elders with the younger people. In most cases, those middle generations cannot speak the language, so they can be of help, but not really as teachers, and they're not your primary target as learners either. The whole effort, I think, should be making it possible to pass on that knowledge that the elders have to the very youngest generation in your tribe. So try to always keep that focus in mind. Although you may have other adult classes and things that people are interested in, that's fine. But always make sure that you're always making an effort in this direction. Third, try to interface with institutions in your community and in your tribe. A lot of times I've seen people conducting language classes. It's in a certain room on a certain night at a certain hour, and if you're not in that place at that time, there is no presence of the language. Try to interface with your other institutions. So for instance, when the people in your class are learning how to say things in your language, encourage them to go to the tribe and maybe put signs on the wall. At the tribe, it might be something simple like just putting up a sign on the restrooms that's in your traditional language as well as in English. Other things, just to sort of put the language out there more. Make sure that it's out there in the institutions that people are going to, so that people that aren't even in your class can see, oh, something's going on. They're starting to bring the language back into our tribe here. That's really neat. Also, other kinds of institutions in the broader community, like sometimes you can get public libraries involved or local museums. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. Other types of institutions, the school systems, of course. So try to connect up with these other institutions and not just be too self-contained and isolated in your language work. Fourth, get some funding. Everyone always is faced with this problem in any kind of project of this sort. But of course, there are various places you can look to for funding, and we've done a show on this too. But primarily, I would say look to your tribe itself for funding. Look to individuals that may put together a language committee, and they may contribute or become members. You might set up a kind of contribution network like that. And also look to outside funding sources, foundations, and so forth. And if anyone needs help finding what some of those are, please get in touch with us at the Intertribal Wordpath Society. We can give you some tips on that. And finally, if you are in a language program already, make sure that you have the attitude that you're going to plan and implement what's possible. I recently heard a young Indian person talking about, there was a language meeting going on, and he came in and sat in for a few minutes and was listening to us talk about all these plans we had. And he said, well, you know, we can't pass on the language because only the elders speak it. And we can't pass on the language because the schools don't really want us to. And we can't do it because this, and we can't do it because that. I spoke it as a child, he said, but of course, then I went to the school and I lost it. And that's pretty much what happened to everybody. It was like a litany of very, very negative excuses, I would say. I wouldn't have said that to his face, perhaps. But after he left in a little while, and I was reflecting on that, I thought, you know, I think on some unconscious level he was making a list of excuses to us. This is why I don't do language work, because it's hard for this reason and that reason and that reason and that reason. And he was just sort of calling out all the various obstacles. And if you get into that frame of mind, even some people that are doing the language work can sometimes kind of get hung up on all the negatives, because there are negatives. There's no denying that. And the history has been negative, and it's all an uphill battle. It's difficult. No one ever said it was easy. But if you get too hung up on that, that really will affect the quality of your program. I suggest that you look at things in a more positive light. If this isn't possible, think to yourself, well, what is possible? If we can't do this right now because we don't have the funding, or we don't have the meeting place, or that teacher is sick, or whatever, what can we be doing in the meantime until that becomes possible? Always chase after what's possible, because there's always something that's possible. Anyone can give you a million reasons why something can't be done. It takes real leaders to find out what can be done and to start doing it, and forget about what can't be done for the moment. Just do what you can, you know. Okay, second group of people I'd like to talk about just briefly. If you are involved in the school system in some way, maybe you're a teacher or a teacher's aide or a principal or assistant principal, something like that. I've got about 5 points I'd like to make here. They're briefer, they're sort of general, but they're things I wish people in those positions would keep in mind more. Number one, take some initiative. Don't necessarily wait for the tribe in your neighborhood to come to you and say, oh, please, could we have a language class? It's nice if it occurs to people in schools, and this I've witnessed this happening recently, where a principal went to the tribe and said, you know, we're set up where we could teach your language. Do you have someone that could teach us, that could teach the language in the classroom? And do you have a teacher and some materials? Can we put you on the agenda for next year? And they said, my goodness, yes. It was really very refreshing that the school came to them. It's nice when people in the school system do take that kind of initiative. Number two, always work with the Indian community, and in particular there are organizations within school systems, I think all over the state, where you can consult Indian parents and follow their guidance as to what they would like to have happen with their children who are students in the school. Number three, remember good old House Bill 1017, which was passed several years ago, which does make it somewhat easier, that makes a more friendly environment in the school for Indian languages. It was a Educational Reform Act. It had a lot of aspects to it, but one of the aspects was pushing more for foreign language teaching, and that was later explained to include, of course, not just foreign languages, meaning from outside of our country, but any non-English language is to be encouraged to be taught starting right from kindergarten on up. Take advantage of this relatively new attitude in the system. Again, contact your local tribe or language committee or whoever does work with the Indian language that's relevant in your community, you school leaders. Also get some advice, again, as I was saying in the language committee, people get advice of specialists, not just generalists. Just because someone has a PhD or is a high-level administrator or something does not mean that they know the first thing about how to teach language. Make sure you get advice from people that have specialized knowledge in that area. And finally, this is a big point that's really I've been thinking of more and more lately. Don't go for the quick, glossy product. A lot of times, you know, a principal or a school superintendent says, boy, it'd be great if we had language classes and then we could put out this book and show people what a good thing we've done, and we could put it on the internet. Everybody wants to put stuff on the internet, get it on the computer, and we could have CD-ROMs, we could have this and we could have that. Keep in mind that the essence of language learning is not on a computer or on a CD-ROM. It's not even on a tape or in a book. The essence of language learning is when that class is over, can those students speak the language a little bit? So it's really a personal interaction between teacher and student. That is the essence of what I would define as success in a language class. You can have any number of high-tech gadgets related to the language, and if the students don't speak it at all, then as far as I'm concerned, your language class has been a failure. So try to have that attitude about it. Next group I'd like to address, these last three are very brief. Next group is those who are in tribal government, either in a language department or just in the government on the council or whatever. I'd like you to keep in mind three things. Protect your heritage from politics and the possible resulting loss of funding. What I mean by this is, you know that in a lot of tribes there have been language programs that were interrupted for basically political reasons. Maybe they were sponsored by the tribal leadership changed, the budgets changed, and the thing got dropped. This kind of stuff goes on all the time. Try to set up your language programs so that there's some protection against that. There may be some inevitable bumps in the road because of differences of opinion and so forth. Try to set things up a little bit independent of the particular person or people that are in power, so that the language program won't have to be so interrupted. Do whatever you can to do that, and that will help hopefully help assure a steady funding base for the program as well, and that's so important. Secondly, if you're in tribal government, try to encourage the use of the language in your tribal offices. Again, don't just have it be something that happens in an isolated classroom on a certain night at a certain time. Bring it gradually into your tribal life. That's the only way a language is really going to survive, if it's sort of gradually revived in the community, not just in the classroom. This could be putting up signs or using a few phrases, requiring your employees at the tribal headquarters to take language classes. All of these things are things that have been tried, and with some success, I think. And thirdly, remember that language work is by definition a grassroots kind of process. It's an individual to individual process to teach someone a language. It doesn't have to be one-on-one. It can be a class full of kids or adults and one teacher. But it is by its very essence, it's not governmental is what I'm trying to say. It's not a hierarchical thing. Make sure that you encourage your language programs to be sort of grassroots based. Fourth group of people I'd like to address are just people who are Indian people in Oklahoma but don't happen to be connected either to the government or the school systems or a language committee or whatever. The one thing I would tell you is, do join your tribe's language effort, whether it's in an established governmental effort or a separate language committee or whatever it is. Get involved in some way. If there is no effort, start one. Get together with some other people who have a similar desire for something to happen and just start it. If you don't do it, who will? And the fifth group is if you're a non-Indian Oklahoma person and you just would like to be supportive of Indian languages, what can you do? Well, the number one thing I would tell you, get in touch with us and we can give you more detailed suggestions, of course, and primarily get in touch with Indians in your neighborhood and see what they need. But I would say the primary point to remember is be facilitating, be helpful. Do not at all try to be controlling. It's not your language to determine how it should be taught or what should be saved or in what form. But just make yourself available, tell people what you have to offer and ask them what they would like you to do to help. I'm sure there's something you can do. Now, the next section I would like to talk briefly about looking to institutions and the government. In other words, this whole show is about creating opportunities. We can use the attitudes I just outlined, whatever kind of person you are, in whatever setting you're in. There are sort of attitudes that you can adopt that will help create opportunities, I think. But another thing we can do is to look to institutions, including the government and other institutions. Let's think of some examples. And I want to look on different levels, starting at the local level. There are usually institutions that you can interface with. You can have a language meeting there, or you can ask them for help, or there'd be some kind of connection you can set up. One type of institution would be local churches. Another would be local libraries. The school system, which we already mentioned, and also local museums. Not every local community has a museum, but a lot do. There are a lot of museums in Oklahoma, and a lot of them include materials about Indian people, and basically none of them include materials about Indian languages. How come? Well, you can ask your local museum. They may each have different answers to that question, but I think it's a good how come kind of question. I think it's about time people started thinking about adding more language, even if it means just having a recording of someone speaking Indian to speaking in their Indian language and describing an exhibit that already exists. You can make a tape like that very easily, or an accompanying video or something like that. There are all kinds of things you can do. On the state level, museums again comes up here because there are a number of state-run museums, and we have our Oklahoma Museum of Natural History, which is about to open in Norman this spring. Big institutions, potentially big opportunities for Indian language exhibits, preservation, archiving, a number of different things. There are other institutions in our states which do have some archives of language materials and so forth. The State Historical Society has supported language work in the past. They don't have a whole lot of language material there. Maybe they could have more. Maybe you could help request that they do so, help them figure out what to do, how to do it, how to fund it, and so forth. That's one avenue. The Western History Collections at the University of Oklahoma here in Norman is another. They have some language materials on file. They would probably be very happy to archive some other materials. It's a non-circulating collection, so it's a good place to keep something safe. Maybe you could talk to them and set up some kind of effort related to your own tribal language. So with all of these institutions, I'm not only saying you should go bug them and say do more, do more, do more, but another thing you can do, which is very positive, is to use what they do already have. Go and use their collections and make it clear to them that you're glad they've done what they have, but also encourage them to do more. Also at the state level, we have the state legislature. Let me read you a few excerpts from a language-related resolution which is circulating now at the up at the Capitol in Oklahoma City. This is just a draft of a resolution. I don't know if it will even be voted on this session, but several legislators are looking at it. Some have offered to support it or author it. Some who have expressed support are Senator Trish Whedon from Purcell, Representative John Bryant from Tulsa, Senator Kelly Haney, I believe he's from Seminole, Representative Opio Toure from Oklahoma City, and several others. And they're considering whether this resolution might actually get passed this session. I haven't heard that it's dead yet, so I'm still hopeful that it will. Let me just read you a few excerpts. It's provisionally titled the Oklahoma Indian Language Heritage Protection Act. It's somewhat modeled after the federal act which already passed in 1990 called the Native American Languages Act. In other words, it basically just says the government, we in the legislature would like to say that the government of Oklahoma supports Indian languages, and it details that in a number of ways. But it basically is it's just words, there's no funding attached, but I think it's symbolically very important, and you might want to contact your legislators, see if they're aware of this. There are a bunch of whereases in the beginning. I'll just read a few of them. Whereas the state of Oklahoma is home to 38 tribes, members of which still speak 25 Native American languages. And whereas the Native American Language Act of 1990, which I just told you about, says that it is the policy of the United States to preserve, protect, and promote the rights and freedom of Native Americans to use, practice, and develop Native American languages. And whereas Oklahoma has more Indian citizens than any other state, a bunch of other whereases. Indian languages are crucial to the identity, self-esteem, and success of young Indian people. Indian history, culture, and language are so interrelated that when a language dies, it takes with it literature, oral history, song, and other important aspects of Indian cultural heritage. I'm skipping over here, so forth and so on. And whereas all of Oklahoma's remaining Indian languages are endangered, here comes the punch at the end, 6 points at the end. Be it therefore resolved that the state of Oklahoma assures all Oklahomans that 1, the state of Oklahoma takes pride in the history and culture of Oklahoma's Indian people as expressed in their languages of heritage, and considers these languages a treasured part of the heritage of our state and of the individual tribes in our state. 2, the state of Oklahoma seeks to preserve, protect, and promote our Indian language heritage. 3, the state of Oklahoma encourages the teaching and learning of our Indian languages at all levels, from preschool to university, with the same seriousness of effort and for the same academic credit as any foreign language. 4, the state of Oklahoma directs the superintendent of instruction to ensure that schools throughout our state have no policy or practice forbidding, ridiculing, or relegating to inferior status any Indian language or students or staff who use any Indian language. I'm skipping a little bit here. 5, the state of Oklahoma will not pass any law that intentionally or unintentionally suppresses Indian languages, limits their use, or threatens their continued existence as living languages. And 6, no provision of this act is meant to negate or undermine the importance of the English language to all Oklahomans. That's in case anyone should read that and feel that English was threatened, which of course it is not at all threatened or endangered, but that's a little proviso to guard against that. So there is this proposed resolution that's up there in the legislature. Be aware of it and see if you can talk to your own representatives about it. Get involved. The tourism department. How many minutes do we have left, Jean? Oh, about 6 minutes left. Okay. I'll mention very briefly the tourism department. The Intertribal Wordpath Society is trying to set up a meeting now to suggest to the tourism department that promotes Oklahoma as, you know, Oklahoma, Native America. They do this kind of promotion with a lot of visuals of, for instance, Indian dancers in full regalia and with sort of Indian-type music, Indian flavor to their music. And they are, I think, intending to celebrate the Indianness of Oklahoma and use that as a way to attract people to come here because it's an interesting place because of all these cultures. You know, I'm totally in support of that. But why not put some of the language in there too? Why not have a few words of Indian languages in some of these glossy advertisements that they produce that are so finely produced? The state of Louisiana does this with French expressions. They do a very good job of introducing the viewer in just a 1-minute spot or a 30-second spot, I guess, probably, to a few words of French that you'll hear in Louisiana and how it's related to the culture and how much fun it is and how interesting. I think we could do something similar here. Now, at the federal level, I mentioned the Native American Languages Act of 1990. Maybe I could read just a little bit of that. And my suggestion here is to be aware of this, get a copy of it, and read it. It was passed in 1990 in the Congress. It begins like this: the status of the Congress finds that the status of the cultures and languages of Native Americans is unique, and the United States has the responsibility to act together with Native Americans to ensure the survival of these unique cultures and languages. I won't be able to read too much of this. It's got some similar whereas kind of clauses as our state proposed resolution. Anyway, after a bunch of whereases talking about the value of Indian languages, it then says, Section 4, it is the policy of the United States to preserve, protect, and promote the rights and freedom of Native Americans to use, practice, and develop Native American languages. Good point. Skipping to some of the best ones here. Number 3 is encourage and support the use of Native American languages as a medium of instruction in order to encourage and support Native American language survival, educational opportunity, blah, blah, blah. Number 5, recognize the right of Indian tribes and other Native American governing bodies to use the Native American languages as a medium of instruction in all schools funded by the Secretary of the Interior. What a switch since BIA days, right, with the boarding schools. Number 6, fully recognize the inherent right of Indian tribes and other Native American governing bodies, states, territories, possessions, blah, 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 and give official status to their Native American, to take action on and give official status to their Native American languages for the purpose of conducting their own business. And it has several other provisions. It's a very positive thing, only symbolic, no funding directly attached to that particular law, but I think it's wonderful that the federal Congress passed that law. And I would encourage everyone who is trying to promote Indian languages to become familiar with that Native American Languages Act of 1990 and quote it widely. When you go to your legislators or your museum or your library or your schools, quote that act. Say, look, the federal government says this, and we know it's true here. How come we're not doing more locally? Also, I had a little section here on approaching non-governmental funders. We've gone all the way up to the federal level, and there is this sort of thing off to the side, which is non-governmental entities, foundations and so forth that might help with funding. There are 3 I'd like to mention just very briefly because they all have deadlines coming up. There is the Federal Administration for Native Americans, a language grant program, of course, but their deadline this year I think is tomorrow. It's very soon anyway. It's too late for this year, but that's an annual grant process. But for these non-governmental entities, there's one called Endangered Language Fund out of Yale University. There's one called Foundation for Endangered Languages, which is based in England, and there's the Lannan Foundation of Santa Fe. They all give small grants, a few $1,000s, up to a few $1,000s to language preservation projects. You can find them all on the web. If you have trouble finding them, get in touch with us and we can find the latest deadlines for you and so forth. Most of these have spring deadlines, so they're coming up fairly soon. To wrap up, now, I'd like to say, I've kind of made a lot of general suggestions here. I'm just trying to remember, to remind people to have a certain frame of mind. Don't get too discouraged. Don't be too confrontational. Do the possible. Accentuate the positive. Know that you do have some support already in law and that there are other people in our state capital working to support Indian languages. Know all of this stuff and do what you can. But I would like to encourage, I know we have a number of, probably have a number of people who watch the Wordpath show who find it kind of interesting, and they might think, well, that's interesting. I would like to encourage all of you in that category who have done nothing more than to think it's interesting to keep this in mind. It's not enough just to be entertained by something in Indian languages or to be sensitive about Indian languages, to care about them, to be interested, even to be very respectful of them. Of course, we want all of that. That's wonderful. But what this program is more about is encouraging you not only to be interested and caring and sensitive, but to be a good citizen for Indian languages. Do something for them. 4 little points here. 1, take some initiative. Let people know that you care, that you're interested, that they're important to you. Whether you're Indian or non-Indian, let people know that you care and that the various institutions, you would like to have them doing more for Indian languages. 2, translate that care into action of some form. Talk to somebody, do something, help with something. Make yourself useful. Number 3, there's a saying about voting. A lot of people have sort of disconnected from the electoral process, which we're hearing a lot about lately. And there's a saying that says, vote your hopes, not your fears. Like the fellow who's giving me all these excuses, you know, these are excuses. I think he was secretly afraid that if he tried to do something, he might fail, and that would be a shame, so he didn't want to try. Always think positively. Think in terms of your hopes, what you'd like to see happen. Sure, you might try a program and it might fail, but if you don't try, you certainly aren't going to get anywhere. And finally, 4th point for you viewers who are just interested and supportive in a general kind of way, don't ignore what's in your own state. Don't take it for granted. Sometimes people in other countries are more appreciative of our own cultural treasures here than we are. I want to show you, I think we have a shot of an article that a friend clipped for me from a newspaper in Sweden. Do we have a shot we can show of this? There we go. This is in Swedish, but it's called Dödsfall utlandet, which means death abroad, and it talks about Carlos Huestes, alias Red Thundercloud, the last speaker of the Catawba language, has just passed away. This was a couple of years ago. I was amazed to see that Swedish people cared about that. So make sure you care about your own state right here. See you next time. Onward.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, ana